Right, let's talk McLaren. My McLaren, the team that I am hugely passionate about, the team that I love, the only team that I ever worked for in Formula One, the team that I desperately want to see getting back to the top, where I firmly believe that they rightfully deserve to be, the team that I feel so sorry for, having watched them go through so many struggles over the last few years, and particularly the guys and girls that are in the garage, that are in the factory, desperately trying to bring this back to some form of what they see as normality, some kind of success, because I know what that struggle feels like, and it only translates into more and more hard work for the people within the team. I desperately want to see McLaren return to form. I know that everybody at McLaren does as well. Massive respect to everybody there, but we've got to talk about how they have underperformed, seriously underperformed, over the last few years. Why is it? How can they turn it around? What are they doing to turn it around? And how quickly is it all going to happen? So this is all kind of reared its head again after Monaco, where McLaren were quite rightfully judged against a Red Bull team that utterly dominated that event. They obviously run with the same power unit as McLaren, with that Renault, a Renault that Red Bull have consistently complained about over the years, yet it has now won 2 races, the same as Mercedes, the same as Ferrari this year. Yet McLaren were nowhere near that Red Bull in terms of performance at the weekend. The first thought is that, well, look, if McLaren say they have one of the best chassis in Formula One, then why wasn't it on a par with the Red Bull chassis at the weekend? It's a good point. It's a point that's valid to some extent. However, I would counteract that by saying Red Bull have a car that is very, very good at that type of circuit like Monaco. A little bit like the final sector in Barcelona, the very tight, twisty stadium sector, which is always a really good kind of reference as to what performance levels are going to be like, with Monaco coming up as the following race. We knew that Red Bull were going to be strong there. So their car really, really suits that kind of slower corner, high downforce circuit. And they're very good at that, and they maximise that, and because they have a power deficit to the top two, those are potentially, that's where their strengths as a Red Bull chassis lies. That is not what you would design your car, your chassis, how you would design your car to perform. If you're sitting there at the start of a design process the year before, you wouldn't target Monaco, you wouldn't target the final sector at Barcelona to be your strengths. And so that's a kind of consequence of them being down on power and having to try and compensate that deficit by having a very high downforce producing car, a very nimble car through those slower corners and the slower circuits. McLaren, I believe firmly, have set out at the beginning of their design process, like every other team obviously intends to do, to design a car that will perform at most of the circuits. We go to 21 different races over the course of a season at the moment. You've got to design a car that's going to be the best it can be at most of those circuits. And occasionally you get an anomaly, don't you? You get an anomaly like Monaco, like Monza, where you got the other end of that extreme, but you can't design your car for those circuits. You try and bring an update package that'll make it work at that track, but the core design is trying to maximise over the course of the entire season. So on that basis then, it's perhaps slightly unfair to suggest that because McLaren were trounced by the Red Bull team with the same engine in Monaco, that is a fair representation of the difference between the two. On the other hand, McLaren have failed on every occasion, I think, this year to match up in performance terms to Red Bull. So you've got to say that Red Bull have just done a better job with their chassis at most of the circuits we've been to this season. I just don't think it's as extreme as Monaco suggests. So why are McLaren in the predicament that they have ended up in after all these years? I think there's a number of issues at McLaren, a number of kind of fundamental issues with the way that the organisation is run, the way that the race team has been run at certain times, And you know, I think if you go way back and go back to the Ron Dennis years, you know, Ron had a huge amount of success over those years. I worked obviously underneath Ron Dennis for a number of years. An incredibly difficult man to work for, but there was absolutely no doubt at that time who was in charge, who was the boss of the entire company. It was Ron's organisation, it was Ron's McLaren, and you worked for Ron. You did whatever Ron said, and you made sure the place was at all times spotless, immaculately prepared, because that is how Ron demanded it, it's how Ron liked it. And because we all had, you know, a mix, I guess, of respect and fear for Ron Dennis, we all did exactly that. We all did exactly what we knew was expected of us, without it really even having to be said. I have to say that I think since Ron's departure, that slipped. For me, that's where things have really started to go wrong. And I mean no disrespect to the current management system, or certainly the individuals within that current management operation at McLaren. But my firm belief, and this is not just a McLaren thing, my firm belief within Formula One is that Formula One teams operate best, they run best when they are run as almost a dictatorship, when there's a very clear management structure where one person is in charge and everybody knows that person's in charge. It has to be an absolute racer, it has to be someone with motorsport at their heart, someone who has grown up within the industry, I think. And these are just my opinions, of course, but this is how I see it working best. Dictatorships within Formula One teams and within departments at Formula One teams work best. If you think about the technical department at McLaren, it's now headed up by Pete Prodromou, Matt Morris, and until very recently, of course, Tim Goss. Three people running that department, running different areas of that department, but three bosses essentially for the rest of the design team to look up to. And each of those three people, as I said before, have to then justify their decision making, have to justify the decisions they make to the other two people. If I think back to when we had Adrian Newey running the show, and I'm sure it's exactly the same now at Red Bull Racing, Adrian Newey was in charge. You know, Ron Dennis left Adrian completely to it. He left the technical side to him. He had complete autonomy to follow whatever design process, whatever philosophy he wanted or he thought was best to follow. He was left to his own devices. And, you know, occasionally he got it wrong, but very often he got it right, and we had successful cars under Adrian Newey as a result. The rest of that drawing office at McLaren knew exactly who the boss was. They knew who was in charge. They got their instructions from Adrian. If they had questions, they went to Adrian. And the whole design philosophy and process was led by Adrian Newey. Nowadays, the sort of modern fashion is to do things much more by committee. And I honestly feel, as I said before, as with the structure of the entire company, in a technical sense, I don't feel like you can be as reactive. I don't feel like you can be as focused. And I just feel like you don't get the very best out of people when they're trying to justify their jobs to a group of different people at the very senior level, because those people shouldn't be having to do that. They should be just focusing on taking their ideas. Those ideas should be the path that team follows. There are just so many things that feel like they've changed, and I know change is inevitable. But look, McLaren need more than anything. They need stability right now. They need financial stability, they need driver stability, they need engineering stability, and they need management stability. And a number of those areas, to me, for the last few seasons now, haven't felt stable enough. Anyway, I better shut up now. I'm here. So this is very strange. First time I think actually I've been back here since leaving. No, it's not. Nearly the first time I've been back since leaving the team. Amazing facility. From a PR perspective, McLaren have clearly made some errors over the last few years, or misjudgments, however you want to describe it. But you know, the way that they very publicly blamed Honda for pretty much all of their troubles over the last few years has kind of come back to bite them now, because if you kind of believed the hype back then, their own hype, as soon as they ditched that Honda engine and took a race-winning engine that the Renault was, they would be able to challenge for race wins themselves, like the Red Bull team, because then surely it would just come down to the chassis, to the McLaren side of things, if the power unit side of things was sorted out. Well, that hasn't happened, has it? McLaren are not challenging Red Bull. They're nowhere near that level at present, and so they clearly have some issues on a chassis side, on a design side, and on an operational side that are meaning that they can't yet maximise the potential of that Renault power unit. I think it's pretty clear now that McLaren, you know, made some poor decisions when they had the Honda in terms of the design of their car. Perhaps they didn't give enough leeway to Honda in terms of working together. That relationship just did not work. The two sides were on such different pages in terms of the way that the two organisations operated, that there was no cohesion between the two over the years. There was no collaboration to the extent there should have been. You know, McLaren, it looks like from the outside now, perhaps didn't give enough of their compromise to Honda, who were still starting out, of course, in Formula One, let's not forget, and had been rushed into starting perhaps a year before they really wanted to by McLaren. So perhaps McLaren should have been a little bit more forgiving in terms of its design, perhaps allowing a bit more space, compromising on aero to allow the power unit to breathe, if you like. That size zero concept clearly caused a number of issues for Honda, and yes, Honda didn't deal with them well either, and I fully appreciate that they also had a huge amount of difficulty. Honda were not the easiest people to work with. Culturally they were so different to the way that McLaren works, perhaps it was always destined to fail. Fundamentally, I don't believe that the racing side of the McLaren group is being run like a race team anymore. It feels like it's changed, it's morphed over the years into this huge organisation, this big group that's being run at a very corporate level. And you know, for me, whatever the racing series you're in, whether it's GP2, F2, GP3, Formula 3, whatever it might be, the core of that organisation, the racing part, should still have the same fundamentals. And that means that you need to be quick to react to things. You need to be quick to react to things in an engineering sense. You need to have a combination of wonderful technology and systems in place, but be able to combine that with common sense and racing experience. For me, it feels like some of that side of things have just gradually disappeared. I don't want to be too hard on McLaren. As I said at the beginning, this is a team that I genuinely love and desperately want to see win, and I know that everybody who works at that organisation wants exactly the same. I know the people at the top of that organisation want exactly the same. But it just feels like it slipped slightly away from being a racing team to being a corporate monster that's very, very good at some things, very, very good in certain areas of the McLaren group, class leading in many areas of what they do. But the racing side seems to be suffering as a consequence of some of those other areas that they may be excelling in. I desperately hope that they can find a solution and change things rapidly. But from what I hear from talking to everybody, from what I see from the outside and my limited experience of working within that organisation, it doesn't feel like it's a quick fix.